Is increasing the number of solar panels imperialist? Or is it illuminating the homes of millions who are trapped in energy poverty? Is investing in climate resilient infrastructure, as advocated by the Sendai Framework for Disaster Reduction, imperialist? Hello, everyone. It is a privilege to be given the opportunity to speak in this esteemed chamber. So thank you so much, Mr. President, for this honor. Ladies and gentlemen, imagine you're all cozy inhabitants of a grand, magnificent house. It's a diverse household with some tenants flaunting overflowing closets, while others have just a few outfits to their name. Now picture a single beleaguered washing machine for the entire house. The laundry hoarders amongst us keep bombarding it with loads until one fateful day, a spark ignites and the whole place goes up in flames. When this happens, do I turn around to Mr. Ansari, who never repeats an outfit, and say, Amar, you're practically an arsonist? Do we stand around squabbling over laundry usage and pointing fingers at who's to blame? Or do we band together, grabbing buckets and hoses to save our precious home from turning to ash? Ladies and gentlemen, the precious home is our beloved planet Earth, and the tenants who exploited our resources recklessly are certainly culpable. But in the face of this blazing crisis, squabbling over past grievances only fuels the flames of suffering. Now is not the time to point fingers at each other, but it's a time for decisive action. I will dismantle the notion that international climate policies are neo-imperialist and instead argue that they are our best shot at diffusing this inferno and securing an equal and livable future for all. Now comes my favorite part. Before I begin my arguments, it's my privilege to introduce the speakers on the other side. First, we have a very good friend of mine, Amar Ansari. Amar is currently pursuing an MSc in Migration Studies at Balliol College. Amar is originally from Pakistan and is leading the case for the proposition tonight. I am also originally from Pakistan and I'm leading the case for the opposition tonight at this debate at the Oxford Union. So it's really true that history repeats itself, with the British again playing divide and conquer. Amar, what are you doing there? Amar! What are you doing there? Come, what are you doing? Speaking second in proposition is the incredibly hardworking Zareen Farhia from Wadham College, who's studying for a master's in science, they're all MScs here, in cognitive and evolutionary anthropology. Now, as brilliant as Zareen is, having been on the same team as her as the last election, I know Zareen's vote strategy involves standing at the gate of the union, flaunting her lanyard and throwing her board card on the face of everyone who comes to vote. People, I see the same lanyard hiding there. So at the end of the debate, run. I told you so. Otherwise, I've told you so. Speaking third in proposition is the Honorable Professor Noel Healy. As a distinguished professor in the Department of Geography and Sustainability at Salem State University, Professor Healy is no stranger to academia. And we're extremely grateful to him for having traveled from so far, and are particularly delighted to welcome here at Oxford, where he can witness firsthand what intellectual and sharp-minded students look like, what I presume is a refreshing change from Salem State. Mr. President, these are your speakers, and they're most welcome. Now, the burden of proof on the proposition is not merely to show that international climate policies are imperfectly designed. I agree with that. Neither is the burden of proof on the proposition to show that developing countries have a disproportionately lower capacity of bearing the costs of these international climate policies. I agree with that. But the burden of proof on the proposition is to prove that these international climate policies are neo-imperialist. Therefore, it's useful to define what neo-imperialism actually is. While there is debate on the exact definition of neo-imperialism, all definitions involve a powerful country holding political dominion or control over dependent territories through economic power or cultural influence. It's a system of unjust, coercive control by powerful nations who exploit weaker ones. It's also useful to define what exactly are these international climate policies that we're talking about. An example is the Paris Climate Agreement, which was signed by 196 countries in December 2015, where all these parties agreed to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Yes, while I agree there is an imbalance in negotiating power between richer and poorer countries, but agreements such as the Paris Climate Agreement or the Kyoto Protocol were voluntarily agreed upon and later ratified by sovereign nations through an arduous process of grueling negotiation, deliberation, and consensus building. Therefore, to call international climate policies, which are reached as a result of consensus, neo-imperialist, is a willful misrepresentation of how international diplomacy works. And let's dip deeper into what these policies are that the opposition calls neo-imperialist. Is increasing the number of solar panels imperialist? Or is it illuminating the homes of millions who are trapped in energy poverty? Is investing in climate-resilient infrastructure, as advocated by the Sendai Framework for Disaster Reduction, imperialist? Or is it protecting vulnerable communities from the impact of climate change? I ask the Chamber to consider, are international climate policies providing climate finance to nations through the Green Climate Fund established by the UNFCCC imperialist, or is it leveling the playing field for developing nations to tackle climate change and pursue sustainable development? Furthermore, I would like the proposition to tell me, who exactly is the imperial power orchestrating the grand climate colonial conspiracy? Is it the United States, which in one administration takes the lead in reaching the Paris Climate Agreement, and in another administration pulls out of the Paris Agreement? Because, to quote the Trump administration, it puts the US economy at a disadvantage? Or is it the European Union, which cannot even reach consensus on something as simple as the standardization of food labeling regulations, but apparently is plotting the economic subservience of the global south through international climate policies? The reality is that the leadership on climate change is diffuse. Nations large and small, rich and poor, are playing a significant role in shaping the agenda. Developing nations, such as my own country of Pakistan, have been some of the strongest voices for ambitious climate action because it affects us the most. The neo-imperialist framing not only erases our agency, but it infantilizes us as passive victims of a neo-colonialist plot, which I reject, because gone are the imperialist days of dominion. It is now us from the global south that will lead the charge in the battle for saving our planet. International climate policies are not neo-imperialist, but they're necessary. In a world where nations often engage in a race to the bottom, international climate policies stand as a beacon of unity and collective action. Too often, we witness countries competing to attract investment and industry by lowering environmental standards and exploiting natural resources at unsustainable rates. It's a perilous game of environmental brinkmanship, where the cost of victory is the degradation of our shared planet. But amidst this downward spiral, it's international climate policies which offer a different path, a path where nations can collaborate rather than compete, where environmental stewardship is valued over short-term gains. Look at what international climate policies well-designed can do. Take, for instance, the Montreal Protocol, a shining example of global cooperation in phasing out ozone-depleting substances. By rallying behind a common cause, nations demonstrated that environmental protection need not come at the expense of our shared future. Instead, they showed that by working together, we can preserve our planet for generations to come. International climate policies, where the emphasis on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and collective ambition, offer us the only viable route forward, a route where we rise together or we risk falling apart. Now, climate change has had devastating consequences, and It is developing countries which are the most vulnerable, as they're the least capable of mitigating the effects of climate change. From catastrophic flooding in my own home country of Pakistan to increasingly intensifying droughts in Africa, it is the developing world which bears the brunt of climate change's increasingly deadly impacts. Wealthy nations have the resources to adapt and protect their citizens, but developing nations do not. Therefore, the other side argues that international climate policies restrict and hinder the economic progress of these developing countries, and hence are further weakening how effectively they can mitigate the effects of climate change. While I agree that economic development is crucial for improving living standards, it doesn't need to come at the expense of the climate. The global green transition is opening enormous opportunities for sustainable growth and prosperity. The next industrial revolution will be green, and as such, there will be new winners from this revolution. With the right support, the right international climate policies, developing nations can be at the forefront of the revolution, leapfrogging dirty development pathways. And we're already witnessing the dividends that can come from green growth in developing countries as climate change is opening up new industries. Take the example of the explosive growth of China's solar panel industry, which demonstrates the potential for climate action to exhibit rather than inhibit economic activity and dynamism in the global south. The Chinese solar industry now employs about 3 million people. Or take the example of the electric vehicle industry in China. It is now worth about $400 billion. It's more than the GDP of Pakistan. Thus, by framing climate agendas as neo-imperialists, the critics deny developing countries the tools that we need to build the clean, resilient economies of the future. Now, we can debate about this motion all day, but what we mustn't forget is that in the time I've spoken to you, 500 million tons of carbon dioxide have entered the atmosphere. 500 million. In the same 10 minutes that I've spoken to you, calamities caused by climate change have taken the lives of 5 people. We are no longer in the hypothetical, people. This is a crisis we shall act on now, together and united. Thank you.